The North Atlantic, 55 degrees north, 35 degrees west. May 19th, 1943, just before dawn. The sea is black. The wind is coming out of the northwest at force 6. A German submarine, U-954, is running on the surface between two waves, her diesels beating a low, steady rhythm into the dark. She has been at sea for 11 days. This is her first war patrol. She has not fired a torpedo. She has not sunk a ship. She has, in every measurable sense, done nothing at all. On her conning tower, a young officer stands watch. He is 20 years old. His name is Karl Dönitz. He holds the rank of Lieutenant zur See, the lowest commissioned rank in the Kriegsmarine. His father is the most powerful naval officer in Nazi Germany. Neither Peter, nor his commanding officer, nor any of the 46 other men below decks know that a British frigate is closing in the dark. HMS Jed. She is not alone. HMS Sennen is with her. Both belong to the first support group, one of the new hunter-killer teams the Royal Navy has been assembling all spring. They have a fix, they have a bearing, and they have depth charges, barrels of high explosive rolled off the stern to detonate at set depths beneath the surface, crude by later standards. Deadly enough on this night. At 0746 hours, Jed opens fire. The charges tumble into the water in her wake. Oh, one of them detonates close enough to the pressure hull of U-954 to split her open somewhere near the after torpedo room. There is a single detonation, then a second, much larger, as her batteries rupture and her own torpedoes cook off. She goes down in less than a minute. 47 men die in the dark. Karl Dönitz is one of them. 2,000 kilometers to the east, in an office on Bendlerstrasse in Berlin, a man in a gray admiral's uniform will receive a telegram in 3 days' time. He is 51 years old. His name is Karl Dönitz. And by the end of this, he will lose 41 submarines, 1,500 submariners, and one son. This is the story of Black May. Rewind. 1939, September. The war is 6 days old, and a German submarine called U-30 puts a torpedo into the passenger liner Athenia west of the Hebrides. 117 civilians die. It is the first shot of a campaign that will run, without pause, for 2,074 days. By 1942, that campaign is winning. German U-boats sink 1,160 Allied merchant ships in a single year. 6 million tons of shipping, food, oil, ammunition, aircraft parts, tanks, sent to the bottom of the Atlantic. The math is not complicated. Britain imports 2/3 of her food. If the U-boats sink more ships than the Allies can build, Britain starves. If Britain starves, the war in Europe ends. Winston Churchill will write years later that the only thing that ever really frightened him during the war was the U-boat peril. He is not being dramatic. He is being precise. The man responsible for that peril is Karl Dönitz. He is a veteran of the last war. In 1918, as a young lieutenant, he commanded a small submarine called UB-68 in the Mediterranean. She was sunk. He was captured. He spent 10 months in a British prisoner of war camp, thinking about what he would do differently the next time. He decided that a single submarine hunting alone was too weak, but many submarines hunting together, coordinated by radio, could tear a convoy apart. He called the tactic Rudeltaktik, Wolf Pack. For 20 years between the wars, he refined it. He wrote the manuals. He trained the crews. He drilled the concept into every young officer who came through the U-boat arm. When the war came, he was ready, and on the 30th of January 1943, he was promoted to Gross Admiral, replacing Erich Ryder as Commander-in-Chief of the entire Kriegsmarine. He kept, in addition, personal command of the U-boat force. He would set the strategy himself, from Berlin, every day. His flagship was a coded radio net. His weapon was a fleet of 400 submarines. And his shield, the thing he trusted absolutely, was a machine. The Enigma machine. Every message Dönitz sent to his U-boats was encrypted through a naval version of Enigma called M4. It had 4 rotors instead of 3. The number of possible settings ran into the quintillions. The German Navy believed with religious certainty that it could not be broken. They were wrong. In March of 1943, Dönitz reached the peak of his war. In that single month, his wolf packs sank 120 Allied merchant ships. The Admiralty in London held a meeting in which senior officers openly discussed whether the convoy system, the foundation of Allied shipping doctrine, should be abandoned. The Atlantic was hemorrhaging tonnage. The line was breaking. And that is the first thing you need to understand about Black May. The disaster that was about to fall on the German submarine force did not fall on a losing side. It fell on the side that was, by every visible measure, winning. March 1943 was not the beginning of the German defeat. It was the night before the dawn that turned everything upside down. Nobody in Berlin saw it coming. Nobody in London believed it was possible. And it was already silently underway. 60 days. That is how long it took. The reason it took only 60 days sat in a nondescript red brick country house 60 kilometers north of London. Bletchley Park. Government Code and Cipher School. Officially, it did not exist. Inside a wooden hut called Hut 8, a team of mathematicians and linguists had been trying for most of 1942 to break the 4-rotor Enigma. For 10 months they failed. The Atlantic bled. Men drowned in oil fires. Cargoes of grain sank into water 4 kilometers deep. Then, on the 30th of October, 1942, 3 British sailors from HMS Petard boarded a sinking German submarine called U-559 in the eastern Mediterranean. 2 of them, Colin Grazier and Anthony Fasson, drowned when she went down. They had recovered a set of German codebooks. Those code books arrived at Bletchley Park in November. On the 13th of December 1942, Hut 8 broke the four-rotor Enigma. The code name for that traffic was Shark. The head of Hut 8 was a 33-year-old civilian named Hugh Alexander. He was, in peacetime, the British national chess champion. He had taken over day-to-day running of the hut from a shy, difficult mathematician named Alan Turing, who had moved on to other projects. Alexander was not as famous. He was, by most accounts of the people who worked with him, better at running a room. Every morning from December 1942 onward, Alexander's team read Karl Dönitz's mail, his deployment orders, his fuel states, his rendezvous coordinates, his weather reports, his condolence telegrams to widows. They knew on any given day roughly where every operational U-boat in the Atlantic was. Dönitz did not know they knew. That is the second thing you need to understand about Black May. The battle that was about to happen was not fair. It had not been fair for 5 months. The Germans were fighting an enemy who could hear them think. The information had to go somewhere. It went to Liverpool. On the 11th of November, 1942, a new commander-in-chief took over Western Approaches Command. His name was Sir Max Horton. He was 59 years old. Like Dönitz, he was a submariner from the last war. Unlike Dönitz, he had won his medals sinking German ships in the Baltic in 1914 and 15. The two men knew each other's names. They had never met. They would never meet. Horton set up his headquarters in a fortified basement beneath a building called Derby House in central Liverpool. The staff called it the Dungeon. The main plotting room had a wall-sized map of the North Atlantic. Every convoy was tracked. Every U-boat sighting was pinned. Every message from Bletchley Park was walked into that room by a Wren officer with a signal flimsy and pinned onto the board within minutes. Horton was cold. Horton was demanding. Horton fired officers who could not keep up. He also understood, better than almost anyone else in the Royal Navy, that the war at sea was not going to be won by heroism. It was going to be won by systems, by radar, by aircraft, by training, by the patient, unromantic work of matching the right escort group to the right convoy on the right day. He had inherited in November 1942 the worst position in the Royal Navy. Losses were catastrophic. The convoy system was under review. His predecessor had been quietly removed. 6 months later, in May of 1943, he would preside over the greatest submarine defeat in history. He did not yet know it. Neither did Dönitz. Neither did Peter Dönitz, who in April of 1943 was reporting to a U-boat base at Kiel for his first operational assignment. The pieces were on the board. On the 21st of April, 1943, a convoy of 43 merchant ships cleared the Mersey estuary bound for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Her designation was ONS-5. Her escort was Escort Group B7, commanded by a 30-year-old Royal Navy commander named Peter Gretton, flying his broad pennant from the destroyer HMS Duncan. At the same hour, in Berlin, Karl Dönitz was looking at a chart on which 51 U-boats were converging into two enormous patrol lines across the North Atlantic. He was preparing the largest coordinated wolf pack attack of the entire war. In Liverpool, in the dungeon beneath Derby House, Max Horton was reading a decrypt from Bletchley Park. He knew where every one of those 51 submarines was going to be. Convoy ONS-5 sailed on the 21st of April, 1943. 43 merchant ships, grain carriers out of the Mersey, tankers riding low, refrigerated meat ships from the Argentine trade, old tramp steamers with rust weeping down their plating, and one or two new-build American Liberty ships still smelling of the shipyard. Their cargoes were flour, timber, coal, iron ore, and men. 43 ships. Somewhere around 1,300 souls at sea, counting the merchant crews and the passengers. At their head steamed HMS Duncan, a destroyer of the D class laid down in 1930, 23 years old. Not fast anymore. Not new anymore. On her bridge stood Commander Peter Gretton, 30 years old, Royal Navy, tall, thin, and by every account of the men who served under him, quiet in a way that made subordinates listen harder. His escort force, Escort Group B7, was a mixed bag. 2 destroyers, 1 frigate, HMS Tay, 4 corvettes, a single rescue trawler, 9 warships to defend 43 merchantmen across 3,000 miles of ocean. Gretton had done this before. He had lost ships before. He had written the letters. He had read them out loud to himself before he sealed them because he wanted to know how they sounded to a wife in Glasgow or a mother in Halifax. He knew what was coming. He did not know how much of it was coming. For the first 4 days, the weather did the work of the Germans. A gale came down out of the northwest, force 9, gusting force 10. The waves ran 15 meters from trough to crest. Merchant ships broke station. The convoy scattered into groups. Signaling was impossible. Boats were smashed against davits. Men were washed off deck. By the 28th of April, the convoy was strung out over more than 100 miles of ocean. And it was at that moment that the wolves found them. The first pack was called Finch, 15 U-boats. They were joined within 36 hours by a second pack called Amsel, Blackbird. Together, more than 30 German submarines were converging on ONS-5. They were doing so because Karl Dönitz in Berlin had ordered it. His radio messages went out in the M4 Enigma cipher. He believed those messages were secret. They were not secret. Every one of them was being read at Bletchley Park. Within hours of transmission, sometimes within minutes, the decrypts were rushed south to the Admiralty in London and west to the dungeon under Derby House in Liverpool, where Sir Max Horton stood in front of his map wall and watched the German submarines close on S5 as if he were reading their thoughts. This is the thing that Karl Dönitz never understood. Not in May of 1943. Not for the rest of his life. He believed he was losing to radar. He believed he was losing to aircraft. He believed he was losing to bad luck and bad weather and the failure of his crews. He never believed, not seriously, that his own code had been broken. The Royal Navy let him keep believing it, because if he ever changed the Enigma, the mail would stop. So Bletchley Park hid its knowledge inside layers of misdirection. Every attack that came from a decrypt had to be accompanied on paper by an independent sighting, a reconnaissance aircraft that just happened to be flying the right patrol at the right time, a destroyer that just happened to alter course toward the right bearing. Every ambush had to look, from the German side, like coincidence. The men who paid for that deception were the merchant sailors of S5. Horton could not simply pull the convoy out. That would have told Dönitz everything. He had to let S5 take the punch and hope his escorts and his new equipment and his young commanders were good enough now to make the Germans bleed for every ton they took. They were. The fighting began on the night of the 28th of April. It ran without meaningful pause for 8 days. A U-boat surfaced in the moonlight and fired a spread of 4 torpedoes into the convoy, a steamer called McKeesport, 5,000 tons, took one amidships and broke in half. Her crew of 44 went into the water at 3 degrees Celsius. 37 were pulled out alive by a rescue trawler. 7 were not. Another ship, the Lorient, was hit. She sank without survivors. 38 men. Another, the Bristol City. Another, the Wentworth. Another, the North Britain. Another, the Harperley. Ships going down in the dark, oil burning on the water, the terrible orange glow of a tanker gone up, spreading across the surface of the sea, while the ships behind it steamed straight through, because to stop was to die. By the 4th of May, 13 merchant ships were on the bottom of the Atlantic. Convoy on S5 was bleeding to death, and then Gretton had to leave. His destroyer, HMS Duncan, was running out of fuel. She had spent too many hours at high-speed hunting contacts, and the North Atlantic weather had made refueling at sea impossible. If Duncan did not detach immediately for St. John's, Newfoundland, she would drift dead in the water in the middle of the battle. Gretton did the math. He gave the order. He handed command of the escort to the senior officer of the frigate HMS Tay, a Royal Naval Reserve officer named Lieutenant Commander Robert Sherwood. Sherwood was not a career naval officer. He was a reservist. His warship was a frigate, small and lightly armed, not a destroyer. He was, in the strictest naval sense, taking over the wrong job on the wrong ship at the wrong moment. For the next 48 hours, he ran one of the best defensive actions of the entire war. The night of the 5th of May more than 20 U-boats attacked ONS-5 simultaneously. It was, by any measure, the largest coordinated submarine attack in history. Sherwood, on the bridge of HMS Tay, was directing 5 remaining escorts against them. He did not panic. He did not break formation. He assigned targets, called in reinforcements from a second support group, racing west from Iceland, and held the line. And then the sea took a hand. A fog bank rolled down out of the north. It settled over the convoy like a lid. For the U-boats on the surface, that fog was blindness. Their lookouts could see nothing. Their radar detection equipment, a device called METOX, was tuned to pick up the old British long-wave radar sets. It could not hear the new one, because during the winter of 1943, British and Canadian escorts had begun receiving a radar called Type 271. 10 centimeters. Centimetric. A wavelength the Germans did not know existed and could not detect. In the fog, off Newfoundland, in the last hours of the 5th of May and the first hours of the 6th, the escorts of ONS-5 could see the U-boats, and the U-boats could not see the escorts. 6 U-boats died in 12 hours. U-638, depth charged by the corvette HMS Sunflower. All 44 men lost. U-125, rammed by the corvette HMS Oribe in the fog, then finished by HMS Snowflake. All 54 hands. U-438, sunk by HMS Pelican with depth charges. All 48. U-531, depth charged by HMS Vidette. All 54. U-192, killed by the corvette HMS Loosestrife. All 55. U-630, attacked and sunk by a Royal Canadian Air Force Canso patrol aircraft. All 47. Somewhere between 200 and 300 German submariners died in that fog in the dark without ever seeing the ships that were killing them. At dawn on the 6th of May, the U-boats that were still alive broke off the attack. Convoy ONS-5, what was left of her, 30 ships out of the original 43, steamed on toward Halifax. Robert Sherwood, on the bridge of HMS Tay, had not slept in 3 days. In Berlin, Karl Dönitz read the after-action reports and did not understand what had just happened to him. He had sent 30 submarines against a single convoy. He had expected a slaughter. He had gotten one, but it was his slaughter, not the enemy's. 13 merchant ships was a heavy blow, yes, but 6 submarines lost and another 5 badly damaged. In a single action was a rate of exchange his force could not survive. He suspected treachery. He opened an internal investigation. He asked whether Enigma had been compromised. His signal officers, his cryptographic experts, his intelligence staff all told him the same thing. Enigma was unbreakable. He believed them. So he looked elsewhere. He blamed radar. He blamed aircraft. He blamed the growing number of very long-range B-24 Liberator bombers now flying out of Iceland and Newfoundland, closing the mid-Atlantic air gap that had once been the U-boat's hunting ground. He blamed the new weapon that Allied escorts were using a head-throwing mortar called Hedgehog, 24 small bombs in a ring, contact-fused, unlike the old depth charges that had to be guessed at. Every one of those things was real. Every one of those things was killing his men. But the invisible thing, the thing that had put escort group B7 in exactly the right patch of ocean, on exactly the right night, the thing that would keep doing so for the rest of the war, that thing was Bletchley Park, and he never found it. It stayed a secret until 1974, 29 years after the war ended, 6 years after Karl Dönitz himself had died. He went to his grave believing he had lost the Atlantic to radar. The Battle of Oness 5 ended on the 6th of May. It did not stop the war. It started the killing month. Between the 7th and the 18th of May, the Allies read Dönitz's redeployment orders in real time and vectored more escort groups and more Liberator squadrons onto more wolf packs. Every day, the numbers came into the dungeon. Every day, Sir Max Horton stood in front of his map and moved pins. U-boats disappeared. 1 a day, 2 a day, sometimes 3 in 12 hours. Then came Convoy SC-130. She sailed from Halifax on the 11th of May. 38 merchant ships, bound for Britain. Her escort was Escort Group B7 again. Peter Gretton, refueled and rested, was back on the bridge of HMS Duncan. Dönitz sent 25 U-boats after her. Not one of them got through. Not one merchant ship was sunk. Not one man was lost on the Allied side, from the convoy or from the escort. But 5 U-boats died. One of them was U-954. She had been ordered into the patrol line called Donau on the 16th of May. Her commanding officer was Oberleutnant zur See Odo Loewe. He was 27 years old. His first officer was another young lieutenant. His crew was 47 men, most of them under the age of 25, many of them on their first patrol. One of them was Lieutenant zur See Peter Dönitz, 20 years old, on his first war patrol, son of the commander-in-chief of the German Navy. On the 19th of May, at 55 degrees north, 35 degrees west, a British Liberator of 220 Squadron IRF got a radar contact. It called in the surface escorts of the first support group, HMS Jed, HMS Sennen. They came up on the position. They attacked with depth charges. U-954 went down with all hands. 3 days later, on the 22nd of May, an aide walked into Karl Dönitz's office in Berlin with a signal flimsy. The Gross Admiral read it. He did not speak. He did not sit down. He read it again. His son was dead. 2 days after that, on the 24th of May, 1943, Karl Dönitz sent a signal to every U-boat in the North Atlantic, ordering them to withdraw, to break off operations, to fall back to a holding area southwest of the Azores. In the war diary of the Befehlshaber der U-Boot, in his own handwriting, he wrote a single sentence that closed a chapter of the Second World War. "We have lost the Battle of the Atlantic. By the end of May 1943, 41 German submarines were on the bottom of the Atlantic. 41 in 31 days. To understand what that number meant, you have to set it against the month before. In April, the U-boat arm had lost 15 submarines. That was already the highest monthly loss of the war. In March, it had lost 15 as well. Losses in that range were painful but sustainable. The shipyards at Kiel and Bremen and Hamburg could replace them. 41 could not be replaced. Roughly 1,500 German submariners died in the month of May 1943. Most of them were under the age of 25. Most of them died without ever seeing the ship or the aircraft that killed them. They died in cold black water, 4,000 meters deep, pinned inside a steel tube that was crushing itself around them as it sank. On the other side of the ledger, 58 Allied merchant ships were sunk in May. That was still a significant number. Widows in Halifax and Liverpool and New York were still receiving telegrams, but 58 was down from 120 in March. The ratio, the trade, the arithmetic of the Battle of the Atlantic had inverted. In March, the Germans had sunk about 10 merchant ships for every submarine lost. In May, the Germans were losing 1 submarine for every 1.5 merchant ships they sank. That was not a fluctuation. That was a collapse. Karl Dönitz saw the numbers. He accepted them. On the 24th of May, he pulled his boats out of the North Atlantic. It was the correct decision. It was also, though he did not phrase it this way, an admission that the war he had spent 25 years preparing to fight was over. He was 51 years old, and he had just lost it. Here is the thing that most people who tell this story leave out. While Karl Dönitz was reading casualty reports in Berlin, 3,000 miles to the west, in the shipyards of Richmond, California, on San Francisco Bay, a company owned by an American industrialist named Henry Kaiser was launching new merchant ships at a rate that had no precedent in the history of shipbuilding. Kaiser's yachts, along with the other emergency shipbuilding facilities up and down the American coast, launched more than 140 new Liberty ships in the month of May 1943 alone. 10,000 tons each, riveted and welded and slid into the water on average in about 42 days from the laying of the keel. One of them, as a publicity stunt, had been built in less than 5 days. The Germans sank 58 ships in May. The Americans built more than twice that number in the same 31 days. That is the fact that decided the Battle of the Atlantic. Not the radar, not the code breaking, not the Liberators, not the Hedgehog, not the courage of Robert Sherwood in the fog off Newfoundland. All of those things mattered. All of those things killed U-boats. But underneath all of them was a simpler and more brutal arithmetic. The United States had, by 1943, become an industrial power that could outbuild any losses the German submarine arm could possibly inflict. The Battle of the Atlantic was not won at sea. It was won in the shipyards of California and Oregon and Maine. Karl Dönitz never quite grasped that. He kept looking at the water. The war he had lost was already over on land, in a place he never visited. He also lost his family. Peter Dönitz was killed on U-954 on the 19th of May, 1943. His older brother, Klaus Dönitz, was a doctor in training. He was, under Kriegsmarine regulations, exempt from combat duty because his brother had already been killed in action. Klaus was 24 years old. On the 13th of May, 1944, almost exactly 1 year after Peter's death, he asked to go along on a small operation. A raid by German fast attack craft, torpedo boats known as Schnellboot, against Allied shipping in the English Channel off Selsey Bill on the south coast of England. He did not have to go. He asked to go. The boat he was aboard, S-141, was hit by the Free French destroyer La Combattante in the darkness. Klaus Dönitz died in the water. His body was recovered by British sailors and buried with military honors at a Commonwealth War cemetery in Kent. Karl Dönitz lost his second son in almost exactly the same waters where the war would end. Less than a year later, on the 30th of April, 1945, Adolf Hitler shot himself in the Führer bunker in Berlin. In his final political testament, dictated in the hours before his death, Hitler appointed Karl Dönitz as his successor, head of state, president of the German Reich. Dönitz held that position for 23 days. On the 7th of May, 1945, he authorized General Alfred Jodl to sign the instrument of unconditional surrender at Rams. On the 8th of May in Berlin, the surrender was ratified. The war in Europe was over. 2 years, almost to the day, after Karl Dönitz had written in his war diary that he had lost the Battle of the Atlantic, he was tried at Nuremberg. He was convicted on 2 counts, including waging aggressive war. He was sentenced to 10 years in Spandau prison. He served every day of it. He came out in 1956, 64 years old, and lived quietly in a small town in Schleswig-Holstein for another 24 years. He wrote his memoirs. He never expressed remorse for the war. He never expressed doubt about Enigma. He died in 1980 of a heart attack. He did not know, when he died, that the code his own Navy had trusted with the lives of 40,000 men had been broken in a wooden hut in an English country garden. In December of 1942, the men who broke it did not tell anyone until 1974. Hugh Alexander, the chess champion who ran Hut 8, went back to civilian life after the war and worked in the Code and Cipher Division of the British Foreign Office. He died in 1974, at the age of 64, only months before the story of Ultra was finally declassified. He never gave an interview about the war. Sir Max Horton retired from the Royal Navy in 1946. He died in 1951 at 67 of a heart attack. He never spoke publicly about Bletchley Park either. He had signed the same oath Peter Gretton, the young destroyer captain of escort group B7, survived the war. He rose to vice admiral. He wrote a book about the convoy battles called Convoy Escort Commander. He was careful in what he said and what he left out. He died in 1992. Robert Sherwood, the reservist who fought the greatest defensive convoy action of the war from the bridge of a small frigate in the fog, went home to civilian life after the war. He is not famous. He is not on many book jackets. His name is on a plaque in Liverpool. One more thing. In the last year of the war, the German shipyards did finally produce a new kind of submarine. She was called the Type XX-1. She could stay submerged for days. She could run underwater at 17 knots, faster than most convoy escorts, could steam on the surface. She could dive to depths the Allies could not reach. She was, in every sense that matters, the first true submarine, a submersible that lived under the water rather than on top of it. If the Type XX-1 had entered service in 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic might have been fought all over again on very different terms. Only 2 of them completed operational war patrols before the war ended. Neither one sank a ship. The German shipyards were bombed. The steel was rationed. The crews were half-trained. The Type XX-1 came 18 months too late because Black May had already broken the arm that would have crewed her. That is what 41 submarines in 1 month meant. It was not, in the end, a single battle. It was a system winning against another system. It was codebreakers in a country house, and shipyard workers in California, and radar technicians in Malvern, and reservist officers on the bridges of small frigates in the North Atlantic fog. It was thousands of small decisions made correctly over a period of years, coming together in the space of 31 days. And it was, on both sides, a great deal of dying. 1,500 young Germans went to the bottom of the Atlantic in May of 1943. Around 160 Allied merchant sailors went with them over the whole Battle of the Atlantic from 1939 to 1945. About 30,000 German submariners died out of the roughly 40,000 who served. 75%. The highest fatality rate of any branch of any arms service on any side in the entire Second World War. On the Allied side, about 72,000 men and women died in the Battle of the Atlantic. Merchant seamen, Royal Navy sailors, Coastal Command aircrew, convoy commodores who came out of retirement in their 60s to shepherd cargo ships through waters they had first crossed as young men in the First World War. None of them, on either side, knew about Bletchley Park. Most of them died before they could have been told. Back in Derby House, in the dungeon, under the streets of central Liverpool, the great map wall of the North Atlantic began sometime in June of 1943 to have its pins removed. There were fewer U-boat contacts to plot. There were fewer merchant ship sinkings to record. The staff still worked long hours. The war was not over. The war would go on for 2 more years. But something had shifted. Somewhere in Berlin, in an office he no longer visited. Very often, an old admiral kept a photograph of 2 young men in Kriegsmarine uniforms on his desk. He would keep that photograph on his desk for the rest of his life. He never learned that his own code had killed them. He would tell you, if you asked him, that he had lost his sons to radar.